Testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everybody. I'm Terry Shakinovsky. I'm MISTRA's Publication Manager, and I have the honor of welcoming you all to this launch of MISTRA's latest book, Why Innovations Live or Die, South Africa's Innovation System. The book explores the state and fate of innovations in South Africa and traces why these are so integral to our country's socio-economic progress. I'll call shortly on MISTRA's Executive Director, Mr. Joel Nchitenze, to tell you more. But first, a reminder that you'll find us online on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. And the hashtags to use to engage with us on that and on the other social media platforms are hashtag MISTRA Book Launch, hashtag MISTRA Innovations, or simply use hashtag Innovations. The book is on sale at all good bookstores and from MISTRA for 390 Rand, but I'm glad to say we are running a launch discount today. You can snap it up at 330, so you know what to do. And it's also available if you prefer an online version on Snaplify. Over now to Mr. Joel Nchitenze, MISTRA's Executive Director, to give us the context for the book.
Thank you very much, Terry. Welcome to all the colleagues who are here, particularly our distinguished colleagues from the DSI family, the authors, as well as those who are on the virtual platform and all of you who decided physically to join us today. In a recent appraisal of the South African Observatory on Radio Astronomy, there's reference to hundreds of scientific papers published using data from the Meerkat Radio Telescope Array. There are projects that have been submitted for time on the observatory, but they far exceed the space that is available. And the Meerkat team, as some of you may know, has been awarded the 2023 Group Achievement Award by the UK Royal Astronomical Society. Now, the Meerkat and its bigger successor, the Square Kilometer Array Telescope, constitute, I think, a prime example of research capabilities and projects that South Africa has developed over the past 30 years of democracy. I will not refer to the Tinswalos involved. The initiative, which was undertaken with scientists across the globe, adds, I believe, to the list that includes transdisciplinary work that we have done in the past 30 years on HIV and more recently on COVID-19. And of course, the work that has been done, I think, over the past few decades in the mining sector. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, there are projects that were not able to survive, what some have referred to as the valley of death or the innovation chasm, succumbing to what I would call the gravity of failure. Amongst these, very close to my name, are the Joel electric car and the pebble bed modular reactor. So the question is, why do some innovations succeed? through to application and commercialization, and why do others fail? This is precisely what this book, Why Innovations Live or Die, South Africa's Innovation System, it's what this book sets out to interrogate. For a start, it examines the evolution of South Africa's national system of innovation since its vision was articulated in the white paper on science and technology in 1996. The white paper, for those who are old enough to understand what I'm going to say in jest, it's not called as Change Starts Now, though. The white paper reflected the idealism that inspired, I think, a nation that was in rebirth with a better life for all and inclusion in a competitive economy, infusing the policy outlook. Since then, the NSI has been molded and remolded in the light of domestic and global experiences. At the center of these experiences is an attempt to ensure relevance and utility of the innovation system to the lived experience of the South African population. This relates to whether the system promotes economic growth and social inclusion, and whether it inspires social agency and initiative across all sectors of the population. Now, this volume proceeds from the premise that an innovation system should be measured primarily by its impact on the economic, social, governance, cultural, and safety and security areas of human endeavor. But the process is not linear, because even in the wreckage of failure are contained, I think, positive lessons that can inspire new and valuable pursuits. The capacities that are built and supported, the refinement of the value chain from scientific research through to commercialization, the ability to adopt and to adapt. All these and other issues are fundamental to building a system that serves the core objective of improving the human condition. The authors examine lessons from some highly promising research endeavors that fell by the wayside, having floundered in the complexities of a defective value chain, and with some abandoned only to be pursued by others beyond our borders. They also interrogate innovations which continue to impact positively on people's lives. Conceptually, they critique what they refer to as a narrow technical definition of an innovation system. And they encourage a broader approach that takes into account issues such as the macro social environment within which the NSI operates, networks, and the breadth of know-how. In other words, the system of innovation should be treated as a holistic domain, straddling a variety of disciplines and informed by a foundational philosophical outlook. And so we do hope as MISTRA that the book, including its policy recommendations, and we have worked with people who are practitioners in this field, will impact on ongoing discussion, that it will deepen strategic reflections both in the public and private sectors on a matter that I think is fundamental to South Africa's socio-economic progress. Gratitude is also due to the colleagues who contributed to the volume, the peer reviewers, the people who worked on the production, the organizers of today's event, but particularly to DSI for its all-round support, as well as to all of MISTRA's donors. So thank you very much, and I hope we all will all enjoy the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel, for putting the book in context for us and explaining its importance. And we turn now to someone very well placed to continue the thread of what Joel was speaking about. Dr. Mlungisi Cele is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Advisory Council on Innovation, which advises government on science, technology, and innovation, or STI issues. In addition to his extensive academic work, he has offered leadership on so many of the initiatives central to government policy on innovation, including a review of the 1996 paper on science and technology, the aforementioned paper, development of a high-level framework for the development of an STI plan, and the development of a monitoring and evaluation framework for the National System of Innovation, as well as a review of the National Research and Development Strategy and 10-year innovation plan. Not surprisingly, Dr. Cele represents South Africa in various multilateral forums and think tanks. Thank you very much, Dr. Cele, for coming here today to address us.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Executive Director, Joel Netitenze, the book editors and authors. Greetings to all players of the National System of Innovation, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are attending in person and virtual. It is an immense pleasure to be part of this significant event to launch the book titled Why Innovation Live or Die, South Africa's Innovation System, of which I'm delighted that our department contributed some 2 million in support of this work. I hope you're not embarrassed about this, but this is what the DG, because he gave me the speech to read. So, so I have to be, otherwise my annual assessment will be compromised if I don't specify. It is important to recognize that the book launch occurs within the context in which South Africa is celebrating 30 years of liberation and democracy, while at the same time, as we all know, that our country is experiencing a myriad of challenges ranging from economic stagnation, even though, as we know now, that we have gone back to the pre-COVID economic growth trajectory, but we're nowhere near where we should. We're also experiencing social reproduction crisis manifesting itself through the deepening levels of poverty, unemployment, inequality. But we also, at a global level, we are experiencing dramatic effects of climate change and sustainability. And of course, the geopolitical crisis that we're all familiar with, particularly its impact on science, technology, and innovation, And there's a disturbing trend that we characterize as the securitization of science, technology, and innovation, in which STI is increasingly becoming an asset to military operations. Maybe at this point, it's important, maybe even to the authors, to pose a question about whether, as they were writing about the different topics of their book, to what extent did they reflect about good and bad technologies? And whether in the geopolitical crisis that we are experiencing, what is it that we can say about the role of technology in that space? But we're also emerging from a COVID pandemic whose effects we are still dealing with, but also we still need, from the NSI point of view, to understand the real effects of COVID on the system. We know that it stretched the system to the limits in various ways, whether in budgetary terms, whether in terms of researchers, some of whom lost their lives. And then, of course, we're experiencing rapid technological changes. We'll come back to these points. To this extent, colleagues, it's important, therefore, to appreciate that the national system of innovation continues to be impacted by these dynamic changes and is challenged to play a critical role in addressing these societal challenges and ensure that society derives enjoyable benefits from investment in STI. And the executive director correctly argued about the usefulness and the relevance of innovations and technologies to society. In fact, in our view, that technologies become useful to the extent that they are impacting positively on society. If they don't, then questions are raised about it. It becomes therefore important, colleagues, to briefly reflect on the country's STI policy context and trajectory, so that we better appreciate the context in which the various innovations and technologies that the book deals with is appreciated. The first point, of course, to appreciate in this 30-year trajectory is that, colleagues, we inherited a real past. And MISTRA is best positioned to articulate at a broader level what that past represented. But shortly, emerging through a negotiated settlement and political democratic breakthrough, the post-apartheid state was faced with the dual challenge of national reconstruction and development and integration into the global economy, underlined by innovation and information communications and technology, which were both knowledge intensive. Thus, we began as a sector to draw influences in terms of what should then become the post-apartheid STI space. The second feature is that the post-apartheid state inherited an ailing science and technology system. No innovation existed, colleagues, before 1994. We had a science and technology system, which, as it was correctly characterized, the challenges that it faced when we took over power in 1994, there were financial consequences as a consequence of the termination of apartheid technology missions, such as the military dominance in the subcontinent and energy self-sufficiency by apartheid government between 1990 and 94. There were strategic risks faced by SADC from human, economic, and security perspective. There was inadequate intellectual property legislation, fragmented governance structures, reduced levels of local investment in R&D by private sector, inadequate renewal of human resources for STI, and research capacity and infrastructure. As I'm reiterating these challenges, colleagues, I'm sure you are beginning to appreciate that some of these challenges continue to face our system. The third, perhaps, and the most important one is that prior to 1994, IDRC commissioned a study involving some of our experts, some of whom they've contributed to the book. And one major recommendation emanating from that report was that the post-apartheid STI policy, colleagues, will need to address one overriding central question, that is to meet the needs of the majority. It is my conviction, colleagues, therefore, that this should remain an underlying overriding strategic objective of our post-apartheid STI policy, that we should use as a basis to measure progress in this regard. And of course, to understand the post-apartheid STI policy mix properly, it should be explained that the NSI has undergone what we call 2 phases of transition, or rather maybe major policy reforms. The first phase, which occurred between 1996 and 2019, the executive director alluded to that, to what happened. And the second phase commenced from 2019, and it's continuing. The emphasis, the key point to be emphasized, though, is that one should recognize both the continuities and discontinuities during these 2 major policy reforms. But what is particularly important about the second phase is that whereas maybe in terms of practical implementation of the earlier policy reforms, a narrow definition of innovation was adopted to implement, which contradicts what the policy says. And we must emphasize this point, because the white paper 1996 articulates a much broader view of innovation, which is broader than technological innovation. But in practice, we tended to revert back to a narrow definition, or tended to emphasize the technological innovation. The second phase, which we would outline, it embraces a broader approach to innovation and emphasizes its impact on society, the economy, and the environment in an interrelated fashion. As it has been mentioned, during the first phase of the transition, the 1996 White Paper on Science and Technology provided an overarching transformative framework within which all activities of all STI activities were to be rolled out. And most importantly, for the first time, twin concepts were introduced. That is the concept of the national system of innovation and the innovation itself. As I said, prior to 1994, we could only talk about the science and technology system, not innovation. For the first time, innovation was introduced into the lexicon of the STI policy. The focus, colleagues, was to build the national system of innovation and its capacity to meet the national development priorities. Most importantly, we're building new institutions. We're building, setting up new policies and organizations that could, if they work in unison, they could then help us to meet the national development priorities. The question remains whether we have managed to achieve that. And then the second most important aspect of this phase was the development and the implementation of the National Research and Development Strategy, NRDS in short, and the strategic management model, which saw the establishment of the then Department of Science and Technology, the Technology Innovation Agency, the National Space Agency, and it also saw the migration of CSIR from the then DTI to DST. It was also during this phase that formally we set the growth expenditure on R&D as a percentage of GDP target of 1%, which we then use to compare South Africa with the rest of the world. The second phase of the transition or major policy reform, colleagues, the emphasis is on pivoting, whereas the first phase was on building the system, the capacity. The second phase, we draw lessons from the first phase. We want to pivot the system based on the advice that the Hastile report colleagues provided. And the two principal policy documents that articulate the broader framework, or that set the framework for this, is the new white paper approved by Cabinet in 2019, whose vision is to create an STI enabling sustainable and inclusive development in a changing world. And this vision is to be implemented through a 10-year innovation plan, colloquially we refer to as a decadal plan, who's premised on the notion of deepening knowledge economy for enhanced socio-economic impact. So this confirms what we're saying, colleagues, that the emphasis is on trying to use and unleash STI to address societal challenge. We have been criticized, colleagues, mainly by academics, maybe for obvious reasons, that the new policy framework seems to be emphasizing that more the application or the strategic or the developmental dimension as opposed to your traditional foundational science base. Of course, we have to defend to some extent government. We're saying that's not necessarily the case, but it's the emphasis that we have built a solid foundation. We continue to build a foundational basis upon which we then need to then pivot the system, make sure that the system impacts positively on society. Consequently, the decadal plan has set two reinforcing pillars. We call it the decadal plan legs. First leg, we seek to maintain the equilibrium between a focus on impact, including inclusive innovation, and continued investment to develop the system. By, for instance, investing in systemic enablers such as knowledge creation and institutions. That's a point I was making shortly. The second leg seeks to pivot the NSI towards making an increased positive impact on socio-economic development and environmental priorities. Of course, what motivates us as the department, and by extension, the NSI, is to strike sufficient balance between these objectives within the context of limited fiscal constraints. We did indicate even to the president, colleagues, on the 12th of December, when we're making a presentation at the presidential plenary, that the proposal by National Treasury to reduce budget to the sector by a couple of billions is not really a helpful development to realize the objectives that we have set ourselves. But nevertheless, we are encouraged, colleagues, by what we have learned from the implementation of the white paper and what we have observed internationally. And again, we will draw from what we have shared with the president and the stakeholders in December during the plenary in terms of the following points. That it's clear, colleagues, that internationally science, technology, and innovation are seen as the primary productive force. Talent is seen as the primary resource, and innovation is seen as the primary driver of growth. Of course, the challenge is how do we then create a language or a conversation that National Treasury and other colleagues in the trade space could understand, could appreciate, could also see and agree with us that innovation is a primary driver of growth. This remains a challenge from our side, that we need to develop that language and persuade colleagues to see this. Just to make an example, both during the economic recession in 2008 and during COVID, most countries continue to invest in R&D, except perhaps us and few other countries, right? And their figures are well known about where we are in terms of that. Secondly, we've also said to the president that top leaders elsewhere in the world, they have access to science advice through established formal governance structures. So in other words, what you find in different countries are three-tier governance systems. So you've got a level 1 type that provides strategic direction and agenda setting. The level 2, it's around coordination and programming. And then the level 3, it's implementation. And that's where we find generally departments like science and innovation and entities. The level 1 is what some have recommended South Africa should have, a structure sitting in the presidency that should provide advice on science, technology, and innovation to the president and the top leadership of the country. It's happening, colleagues, elsewhere. China, in fact, even the Central Committee of China, of the Communist Party, recently established a task team focusing on science and technology. It oversees the work. It's a recent development. It oversees the work of ministers responsible for science and technology at a political level. And then in government, they have a structure because they do recognize. Until we are able to achieve that, colleagues, some of the challenges that we experience will continue. The third one is to see investment in science, technology, and innovation as a critical enabler. Again, colleagues, the point that we want to emphasize is that STI investment should not be treated like any other budgetary items that National Treasury can willy-nilly cut as it does with other. In fact, we should see it as part of our future development trajectory. So we need that mindset. And we're calling for colleagues to help us change the way that investment in STI is viewed. But we also need a sustained commitment and long-term thinking and prioritization of STI. Here we're talking about developing strategic intelligence capability throughout the system, colleagues. Casey is sitting here. She's one of the people who are specializing in this sort of in the various aspects of strategic intelligence, whether we're talking about future studies or foresight exercises or environmental scanning and so forth. But we need to develop that capability. But we also need to learn to stay to the course. The executive director alluded to 2 projects, the Jewel and PBMR. And our observation, colleagues, which we presented as well to the president, is that one of the reasons why those 2 projects, and I'm looking forward to engage those who contributed to it, to the chapter, talking to it, to hear what their assessment of that is. But our view is that as a country, we are challenged. We seem not to be able to stay to the cause, irrespective of what may be happening. So if one makes an example about these 2 projects, there was one political champion, Minister Erwin, who worked very closely with the president at the time and got support. And when the both of them left government in 2009, and then there was subsequent then the canning or the termination of the PBMR at least. Of course, there are other reasons that might have to do with how we understood the market and the commitment or the lack of commitment or the change in attitude, at least from ESCOM, and the inability to attract investments into the project, but also the inability to have people who understand business and market in the structures that was responsible for PBMR. We had a lot of engineers, but people and people who lack understanding of the market. We can have a discussion. To all, it was the question of funding in the main that needed to be made available. There are issues about IDC, the role that IDC could have played. TIA didn't have much money that was required. But again, it's this inability to stay to the cause, which is contrary to what countries like China and South Korea are able to do. But also, colleagues, we need to make sure that we adopt a whole of society approach when we are implementing STI policy to avoid what is called STI trap. In the main, colleagues, part of the reasons why we are not able to make progress in the STI space is that other government departments and society, they see a lot of our initiatives as simply DSI initiatives or science and technology initiatives. They don't see those initiatives as part of what, so maybe that could be one reason why some of the innovations could be seen as dead or whatever, even though I'm not so sure about the use of living or death of technologies. I must confess that when I first read the topic, I wasn't sure, but I said, I've been asked by the DG, so I have to, I would have preferred maybe to say what makes or do not make some technology to succeed rather than living and yeah. But maybe the colleagues will then appreciate that what we're trying to do now is just to, because our, the section that we've just dealt with, executive director, we were inspired by what Marx and Lenin said some years back when reflecting on mankind, and we took that from what President Begi said some time back when delivering a Mandela lecture, that again, because this notion of live and or dead. So we were saying, if we look at the system of innovation and you equate it to human, maybe let's think about what mankind needs. Marx, as I understand, you'll correct me. Apparently, Marx said men must eat before they think, or so that they can think. And Lenin said, we perceive before we breathe. But we cannot, mankind needs air, needs food, needs water in order to survive. So if we bring that closer to the system of innovation and the technologies, you need therefore to create an ecosystem through which innovations can thrive successfully. So what are some of the elements that you need in the system to bring life to the innovations? So that's what we're trying to briefly identify, colleagues, that the system, as we have said, needs to have a clear vision. We need institutions that can, but we also need to address the challenges that are confronting the system. Now, coming back to the book, colleagues, we think that we have the view that the launch of this book coincides, of course, with the first year of the decadal plan. Casey earlier on was already asking questions about why there's no progress reported on the decadal plan. So even if it's here, we want to know if it's being implemented. So the three thematic areas of the book, which are the examination of the NSI orientation towards transformation, the technology commercialization pitfalls, and the policy response to socio-economic imperatives, they show a strong alignment with the decadal plan. Our one conclusion we can draw from this is that certainly those who were writing the book, of course, they can differ with us. They sought to assist the department and the NSI in implementing the priorities of the decadal plan through the sorts of recommendations, the three recommendations that are emanating from the book, which are to prioritize adaptation and adoption of existing technologies increased focus on the socio-economic impacts of technologies and the move away from traditional siloed models of responsibilities across and within agents. And the DG colleagues, I must specify that's his preliminary reflections on your recommendation. So if this changes later on, don't say that I misrepresented. The DG is leaving end of March. So, so that this is his preliminary considerations. He says on the first recommendation, as the department, together with our entities, we are rolling out several policy implementation instruments aimed at addressing this policy recommendation. And some of these instruments include Sector Innovation Fund, which seeks to enhance the economic competitiveness of participating sectors. It incentivizes the private sector to co-invest with the government in RDI activities that address the competitiveness and sustainability of participating sectors. The second one is the Innovation Fund, which is a public-private partnership to drive co-investment in innovation, high-tech SMMEs. The fund seeks to catalyze the creation and sustained growth of the high-tech SME sector and focuses on de-risking early-stage SME creation to generate sustainable pipeline opportunities of viable, investable, high-tech enterprises for later-stage investments by the private equity sector. The Innovation Fund implementation model leverages the investment expertise of institutions such as TIA, the SA, SME Fund, and the Public Investment Corporation, which in turn drive the syndication of investment with various venture capital fund management entities. So colleagues, these two funds are different. It's Sector Innovation Fund and the Innovation Fund. The second one, on the increased focus on socio-economic impacts of technologies, the department, together with several partners, has identified large-scale innovation programs aimed at driving socio-economic impacts. These include vaccine manufacturing and hydrogen energy. So Zama, your PhD interest has a space, right? So you need to pay attention to what is being rolled out. Yes, yes. Yeah, but she must ask the right academic question. So the third one, in relation to the third recommendation, just 3 days ago, well, 2 days ago, between 27 and 28 February, we hosted a symposium on accelerating innovation in South Africa. At the heart of the discussion was the question of whether our innovation support institutional architecture is optimal to support the visions of the white paper and the decadal plan. It draws lessons from the Malaysian Research Accelerator for Technology and Innovation, the Singapore Enterprise, and Oxford University. The conclusion that one can draw from the discussions is that as the NSI, we still have a lot of room for improvement. In conclusion, to conclude, colleagues, and maybe just to get back to the policy questions and invite, really, this is a way of encouraging colleagues to reflect and work with us going forward, is to find solutions to the following policy questions, colleagues. The first question I alluded to is the persistent decline in growth expenditure on R&D as a proportion of GDP. We have a target of 1.5 that we should be reaching by 2030. We are regressing. I think we're at 0.6. The proposed budget cuts by National Treasury is not helping towards this regard. The main contributor to this decline is business. Business investment in R&D has been declining dramatically. Yesterday we had a meeting which we're working on a new STI indicators report. We are encouraged that the latest figures show a slight increase from the previous year of, I think it's 5%, but it's still very low. So, colleagues, we're therefore asking all of you, what should be done? How should this problem be addressed? It's a systemic failure. How should it be addressed? But also consider the context in which we find ourselves, sustainability transitions, and so forth. So that's the first question that is confronting the system, because if we don't arrest this, certainly all technologies or innovations may not even be born, let alone dying. The second one, colleagues, as we grapple with challenges across health, energy, climate, food systems, and biodiversity, technologies such as synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, advanced materials, and neurotech, they hold immense promises. Yet their deployment carries substantial risks and potential negative impacts on individuals, societies, and the environment. These risks manifesting as social disruption, loss of trust in institutions, increased inequality, and threats to security and human rights could have long-lasting, irreversible effects. Even the OECD does acknowledge this. So in this regard, we are asking colleagues, should we not think about developing a responsible innovation with good governance framework that must be underlined by our democratic values and Ubuntu? So if we were to think about that type of a governance framework, what should be its essential elements? So what is responsible innovation? The third one, I mean, it's, if we consider generative artificial intelligence and the fact that it's got its uses across a wide range of industries, including art, writing, script writing, software development, product design, healthcare, finance, gambling, gaming, marketing, and fashion. We've also seen surging investment in generative AI during the early 2020s with large companies such as Microsoft, Google, and Baidu, as well as numerous smaller firms developing AI models. There are concerns, however, about the potential misuse of generative AI, including cybercrime, or creating fake news or deep fakes, which can be used to deceive and manipulate people. So the question is, what type of policy responses that as a country we need to develop to deal with the challenges that are posed by generative artificial intelligence? And fourthly, how can we help? How can people work together to ensure that the benefits of technologies are enjoyed widely and risks managed? So we are now bringing the question back to technologies. Yes, we want to see a lot of technologies and commercialize them, but how do we make sure that we bring all the relevant stakeholders to make sure that the benefits emanating from such are widely enjoyed and risks managed? And lastly, how do we then shape STI cooperation in times of crisis or conflicts? So the COVID pandemic raised this question sharply, colleagues. And I'm happy that as colleagues at MISTRA told me that the next book project is around pandemics, and you want to understand that. So this is one of the questions that is being grappled with internationally. And as South Africa, we also need to be thinking about this question about how to shape better STI cooperation in times of crisis or conflicts. And the advantage that what is happening elsewhere in the world poses a question. So how do you work with scientists in Palestine, for instance, during this time, or in Somalia or Sudan? And the related question is, how do we achieve science for peace versus science for violence? How do we balance? And I raised the question about good or bad science and innovations. And the question of securitization of STI, which is a challenge. How do we deal with that question? So with those few words, colleagues, would like to congratulate MISTRA for the successful implementation of the project that has culminated in the book, Why Innovations Live or Die. As the DSI, we are proud to be part of this momentous occasion. This is Phil Mjwaka. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sele, for that important reminder of the challenges facing our young democracy in building a system of innovation, and for the insights you offered us into the historical paths to build such a system and the ongoing process to do so. And thank you too for the funding and the backing that the DSI has offered MISTRA. Please pass on in your assessment that we are very, very grateful, and it makes our work possible. It's by such support that MISTRA, I won't say lives or dies, but thrives very well or less well. Time now to hear from one of the co-editors of the book, Zamanzime Mazibuko Mekena. Zama is a senior researcher in MISTRA's science faculty, and she brings to bear her knowledge from editing no less than 3 other MISTRA volumes on subjects relevant to the question of innovation in South Africa, including books on nanotechnology in South Africa, epidemics and healthcare in Africa, and the Fourth Industrial Revolution in South Africa, and now this latest book on innovation in our country. In addition, Zama holds an MSc cum laude from Wits in pharmaceutics, and personally has a pending patent filed for a nano-enabled drug delivery system. Zama, over to you to tell us more about this book.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. So I'll be taking you through an overview of the book. And before I start, I'd like to also just thank Thomas Pogue, my co-editor, who without his input, this wouldn't have happened. So I'll start by just positioning the book and the research. So South Africa has made great progress in developing its scientific and technological capabilities, and in introducing policies to support economic and social development through science and technology. Despite this progress, however, there appears to be challenges to the country delivering on the commercialization of highly promising research. While recognizing that innovative activities are inherently unpredictable and unlikely to be linear, improving the commercialization and success of new products would mean that South Africa would be better able to produce innovations that support economic growth and employment creation and establish the country as a more competitive innovation destination. Successful development of technologies requires investment, knowledge of institutional environments, specialized skills, and understanding of opportunity niches. Research institutions are facing growing pressure to contribute towards innovation and entrepreneurship that has commercial value and that contributes to economic development. Furthermore, public-funded universities are expected to play a significant role in uplifting social and economic conditions through the direct transfer of innovative knowledge products to industry and the private sector. Essentially, publicly supported research is expected to provide better and faster answers to South Africa's public issue concerns. However, even with efforts to address the commercialization of research outputs, groundbreaking innovations such as the Jewel have not been successful at the commercialization stage. The Jewel was an electric 5-seat passenger car conceived by Optimal Energy, a South African company based in Cape Town. It was a concept car that was never released commercially. This was despite the fact that the company that developed the Jewel had conducted a rigorous and successful development process, had a solid team of 108 people, substantial in-house technology, and a remarkable network of partners and suppliers. Nonetheless, it could not successfully commercialize the technology, and it had to close. The authors in this book thus discuss the journeys of various technologies in South Africa and what fundamental systemic causes contribute to their failure or success. The relevance and utility of a system of innovation should be measured primarily by the extent to which it helps to solve societal problems and to improve the human condition. Consequently, it is at what we are terming the domain level that technologies in this publication are assessed. The individual chapters of this volume employ diverse theoretical perspectives. However, we believe that they focus on the journeys of technologies towards innovation, allows them to be framed within Arthur's conceptualization, which takes into account that applied improvements may come in several forms. This conceptualization is theoretically rooted in complexity economics. Complexity economics looks at the process of formation and economic change over time. It also takes explicit consideration of the difficulties in distributing technologies in an environment where some may benefit and some may lose. These are critical issues to be considered given the book's focus on the dynamics of technological development and technology's impact on realizing transformative change. This approach also incorporates the existence of positive feedback or increasing returns, which may lead to situations where the winning technology may not be the best because of dynamic processes with random events and natural positive feedbacks. This book analyzes the journeys of South African technologies and their technology domains. It describes the movement from exploratory principles to exploitation in opportunity niches, as well as established opportunity niches. It seeks to advance understanding about the determinants of commercialization and the extent to which technologies that are successfully commercialized contribute to South Africa's development goals. Further, the volume also examines what can be done to improve the impact of commercialized technologies on national socio-economic priorities. The book's objectives can be framed through 3 primary research questions. The first one, what impact is South Africa's commercialized research having on the achievement of its development goals? Secondly, why are some technologies successfully commercialized and others not? And thirdly, which policy changes could increase the socio-economic impact of South African technologies? In addressing the first question, it is necessary to distinguish between broad and narrow conceptualizations of the national system of innovation. This is something that Dr. Cele already spoke about. As a narrow concept, the national system of innovation consists of formal, explicit, and defined structures. In contrast, the broad concept of a national system of innovation adds networks, capabilities, and know-how, as well as other informal features. This distinction allows one to differentiate between the success or lack thereof of the narrow national system of innovation and the broad national system of innovation in solving society's problems and advancing South Africa's development goals. Similarly, consideration is given to the extent to which contemporary technology domains are facilitating or impeding socially impactful technological development. There's also consideration of which technology domains are currently driving technological, social, and economic change. The second question addresses the key characteristics of technology's journeys to commercialization and how, if at all, successfully commercialized technologies feed back into the development of additional technologies. Exploring this question requires consideration of which factors tend to be associated with success and which tend to be associated with the failure to commercialize a technology. It is important to reflect on whether it is possible to discern factors affecting the manner or rate at which technologies commercialize. The concept of the so-called innovation chasm often comes up in this context. Given the significance attached to the idea of an innovation chasm in many South African discussions, the usefulness or lack thereof of this concept in commercialization must also be considered. The principal narrative is that the technologies can fall into a chasm in the journey from the basic ideation, research, development, and piloting to commercialization. The innovation chasm is then the area where this linear path to commercialization stalls and an otherwise viable technology fails to reach commercialization. In chapter 11 of this book, however, Khan critiques the usefulness of this concept and its use and history in South African science and technology discussions. For the most part, the innovation chasm has not played a central role in the analysis in this volume. We contend that the fundamentally linear approach to a technology's development in the innovation chasm paradigm limits its insights and effectiveness. You'll hear more on this when Dr. Khan presents his chapter later. And lastly, the third question raises the issue of which policy changes can be made to improve the impact that successfully commercialized technologies have on South Africa's socio-economic needs. Particular emphasis is given to what can be done to improve the impact of South Africa's publicly supported technologies on the country's development goals and related issues of public concern. The chapters in this volume are organized into 3 sections, each addressing one of our 3 primary research questions. The first section of the book examines how South Africa's national system of innovation has been oriented towards transformation since the advent of democracy. Both chapters in section 1 focus on aspects of South Africa's technological domains and the extent to which there are failures in the country's system aimed at transformation. Chapter 2 will be presented shortly by Dr. Amy Khan, so you'll hear more on that. There it is. Chapter 3 considers the performance of the South African innovation systems infrastructure. The second section of the book focuses on technology's journeys as they attempt to reach commercialization. The section begins with 3 chapters that emphasize the role played by opportunity niches in these journeys. In the final 2 chapters of this section, attention turns to descriptions of the products and the processes of innovation behind the technologies. I'll allow the authors to get more into detail as they present, and you'll hear exactly what the chapters are about. The third section considers ways that public policy could better facilitate alignment with national socio-economic needs. Returning to the need to address the transformational system failures also raised in section 1, the contributions in this section concentrate on demand articulation failures and reflexivity failures. Facilitating a technology's commercial viability is a complex process that involves a multitude of issues and considerations. These range from market viability to socio-economic impacts, as well as scalability, integration, and capital resources, to mention just a few. Various chapters assess the outcomes of the journeys of technologies and their relationships to issues such as development, power, and agency. This volume is unique in bringing together a wide range of experiences of commercialization of technologies in South Africa. In presenting these experiences, the authors have endeavored to draw out clear implications and policy recommendations throughout. The analyses have the potential to mark the beginning of an important, if to date neglected, conversation around the complex issues associated with commercialization. While this discussion is important, as South Africa aspires to leverage science and technology to advance socio-economic development, it also relates to broader conversations about the costs and benefits of new technologies. While the issue of the commercialization of technologies in South Africa has been addressed elsewhere, we believe this volume is unique in its focus on the evolution of the country's national system of innovation and the ramifications of how the system has evolved. As such, the book forms an important contribution to the literature on the commercialization of technologies in South Africa. I'll leave it there and looking forward to the authors telling you more about the book.
Thank you, Zama, for that overview of what can be found in the book. And I'm also looking forward to hearing from individual authors about their chapters. And we start first with Dr. Amy Khan, who's a research specialist at the Center for Science, Technology and Innovation Indicators at the HSRC, where she also leads the South African Business Innovation Survey. Dr. Khan has also led large-scale socioeconomic surveys in East Africa and South Africa. And in addition to her current research, which focuses on innovation in South Africa's business sector and beyond, Dr. Khan has a doctorate in economics from UCT. Her chapter is tantalizingly titled, Where Innovations May Come to Life. So we are guaranteed some interesting insights. Please come up, Dr. Khan. And just a reminder while she does so, to those of you online, that you can post your questions in the chat now and later, and they will be taken. So you'll have a chance to ask questions along with those in the auditorium.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting our chapter on behalf of my co-authors, Dr. Glenda Chris, who is actually the lead author but couldn't be here today, and Dr. Ilham Peterson. And the title is Where Innovations May Come to Life, a new policy mix to build firm capabilities across the national system of innovation. So the chapter is based on the argument that to bring innovations to life in South Africa, we need a contextually appropriate policy mix to respond to complex growth and development challenges. So there's a large emphasis on growing science and technology capabilities, but this needs to be balanced with building and strengthening firms' technological capabilities. However, our understanding is quite limited in terms of firms' capabilities to operate in local and global value chains, so production capabilities, and also to develop new and improved processes and products, which are innovation capabilities. So we're arguing that we need a stronger evidence base to inform policy design and implementation processes. So what we do in the chapter is we experiment with new ways of analyzing firm level data, and we use the Business Innovation Survey, which is conducted within CESTI, and uses the Oslo-based methodology for conducting innovation surveys. And the aim is to identify modes of innovation capabilities to inform a policy mix that supports firms with diverse innovation pathways. Okay, so in terms of the method that we use a method to map different modes of innovation. And it's what's called a top-down approach based on Arundel and O'Brien's model in 2009. And it's top-down because the different categories of firms are predefined. So the aim is to assign firms to different categories, which reflect the different capabilities of firms. So we've got 5 output modes. We've got, and each category is based on, firstly, the market reach of the firm. So whether they operate on international markets or just domestically. Secondly, the novelty of their product innovations. So whether they introduce new to the world innovations, new to the market, or new to the firm only. And thirdly, the responsibility for their product and process innovations. So do they develop innovations in-house, or do they simply adopt innovations from elsewhere? So combining these 3 categories, we create 5 modes or groups of different types of firms. So at the top, we have new to the market international innovators. So these are firms that operate in international markets. They develop and introduce products that are new to the market, new to international markets, and they develop their innovations in-house. Then the second group are new to the market domestic innovators. So they operate only on the domestic level, and they introduce products that are new to domestic markets, and they also develop their products in-house. Then we've got international modifiers and domestic modifiers. So they operate on the international and domestic level, respectively. The international modifiers introduce new to the market innovations, whereas the domestic modifiers introduce new to the firm innovations. And they also develop their innovations in-house. And then finally, the last group is our adopters. So basically, these are firms that simply adopt innovations from elsewhere. And you can see on the right-hand side, the distribution of the different groups. So when we assign firms to the different groups, we see that most firms fall under the modifier categories, operating at the international or domestic level. And there's a very high percentage of firms that do not actually develop their innovations in-house. They simply adopt from elsewhere. And very small percentage of new to the market international innovators and domestic innovators. So our argument is that once we've assigned firms to these different categories, which reflect their different capabilities, we can then profile them based on various characteristics of the firm. And then using these profiles, we can help to direct policy development of policy instruments and policy mixes that are more appropriate for the firms themselves. So for example, we've profiled them based on their sector, so manufacturing versus services. And we can see there are some differences. So the new to the market domestic innovators are more likely to be in the manufacturing sector compared to the services sector, whereas the domestic modifiers are more likely to be in the services sector than the manufacturing sector. We then look at the number of technologies that the firms use. So we can see that the adopters on the far right, 75% of them do not use any advanced technologies. And then on the far left, we've got new to the market international innovators, and they 90% of them use 4 to 6 advanced technologies. So we can already start to see the differences in capabilities between the different groups. Okay, so then we continue to profile the different modes of innovation. So if we look at firm size, we can see quite big differences there as well. So almost half of the adopters are actually very small micro firms with only 0 to 9 employees. Domestic modifiers are also most likely to be micro. If you look at new to the market international innovators, they 88% are small, so 10 to 49 employees. And then the international modifiers are the most likely to be large. And then if we look at the next graph, we can see, so this is looking at different barriers to innovation or factors that are hindering innovation in firms. And we've divided those up into cost factors, knowledge factors, market factors, and institutional factors. So there's a much longer list, but they're grouped into these categories. And then we can see that for all of the groups, the cost factors and market factors are the most experienced factors impeding innovation activities. And they are most important for the adopters. Whereas the domestic modifiers, for example, experience these barriers to a much lower extent. So what this analysis helps us to do is we can provide some examples of different policy priorities, which as well as firm profiles that can inform the mix of strategies and interventions to help promote innovation in firms of different capability, with different capabilities. So for example, if we look at our adopters, the strategy to or the policy priority to inform the mix of strategies and interventions would be to broaden capabilities so that these firms can access and absorb new technologies. And then we can see we've got the different profiles of our adopters, which will help us to target specific types of firms. And they're obviously of low intensity, and then they're sectoral spreads. They're similarly distributed across manufacturing and services. They're mainly micro, and cost and market barriers are most important. And then if we look at, for example, the international modifiers and the domestic modifiers, they're already developing innovations in-house. So what we want to do there is build stronger capabilities. So further develop their capabilities for technology modification and upgrading to operate on global and domestic markets. And again, we've got the profiling of these groups. And then finally, we have the most innovative groups of firms, so our new to the market international innovators and new to the market domestic innovators. So for these firms, the policy priority would be to strengthen the dynamic innovation capabilities of these firms so that they can operate on global or domestic markets. And then finally, I'm just going to end off with a conceptual model, which sort of brings the analysis and the policy implications together. So what we have on the left, well, first we have the different groups of innovation active firms or innovative firms, which are the different shapes and colors. And the idea is that each group of firm has a unique pathway towards the policy goal. So to get them to improve their innovation outcomes, they need to be helped along their specific pathway. So in this sense, they require differentiated policy instruments and mechanisms to incentivize and support them on these unique pathways. And then you've got the innovation policy goals on the far right, which you're trying to move towards, and then the desired future of inclusive and sustainable growth and development. And then obviously you've got your non-innovative and non-innovation active firms at the bottom, who you'd also need to assist on their unique pathways in order to engage in innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan, for that insight into the various and important modes of innovation. We turn now to the public sector, and we hear next from two authors who co-wrote with others a chapter on specifically the role of public sector innovation in South Africa's wider system. Mr. Piers Skoenrath is the Chief Director for Research and Development at the Centre for Public Service Innovation, which reports to the Minister for Public Service. He's also responsible for anticipatory innovation, which tries to solve the problems of tomorrow. Before joining the public sector in 2004, Piers spent over a decade in the NPO sector, working on urban informal settlements and on finding innovative solutions to poverty-related challenges across our continent. On the international front, he works closely with the UNDP and the OECD in various forums and projects. He holds a BA and a BD from the University of Pretoria. To that already immense expertise on public sector innovation, we can add Professor Geshe Karuri Sabina, who is also both a scholar and a practitioner. The professor is currently an associate professor at the Wits School of Governance, where she coordinates the establishment of a new African Center of Excellence in Digital Governance. She's also an associate professor at UCT's African Center for Cities. Professor Karuri Sabina serves at a leadership level in numerous other NPOs, and it is the vice chair of a community of innovation scholars across Africa. She also holds editorial roles in leading journals in the field, several leading journals in the field of innovation, and a PhD from Wits. May I welcome you both up, pleased to talk to us about public sector innovation.
Thank you very much, Program Chair. We've agreed that I will do the presentation, which can be controlled, and that Prof. Geshe will respond to the questions to protect her reputation. So I hope all the questions will be fielded to her. Thank you very much, Program Manager, Executive Director, CEO of NACI, for the opportunity. I have to expose my co-author. Originally, the working title was Where Innovation Go to Die. And she approached us and to say, there's a book about where innovation die. We have to have a chapter on the public service. And that's how the chapter came about. Please accept my truth of the story, not hers. But I just need to acknowledge the contribution of the co-authors as well, apart from Prof. Geshe, Prof. Njumo, who's now at Northwestern University in Idaho, Iowa, my apologies, and Mr. Nsizwa Dlamini, who is my colleague at CPSI. We engage quite, I think the picture didn't come out on the PowerPoint as it should have. I think there's a little bit of an overlap there. But we thought we'll just share a few pictures. The one on the PowerPoint presentation looks nicer. But just before I start with just explaining what the chapter is all about, why this book is so important for us from the public sector side is probably best illustrated by a story that I think many of you know. During World War II, where the Allied forces had to strengthen and armor bombers and fighter planes coming back from missions. They analyzed all the damage and the bullet holes, and even did statistical analysis of this until someone realized that it doesn't matter. Because the planes that returned had damage to non-essential parts. It was the planes that failed to return that mattered. The data they did not have. And a book like this helped us to normalize failure and normalize failure analysis. We all know that the air transport industry is one of the safest. Why? Because they see every failure as an opportunity for learning and improvement. Imagine if we see every innovation failure not as a policy failure, but as an opportunity for learning and moving forward. And this book, to me, is part of creating a culture of learning from failure. And that's why we were so eager to participate in this. This is a summary of the book. First, we had to take a look at the systems of innovation, how that work from a much more linear to a systems approach to a transformative approach, and the benefits that a transformative approach to innovation systems would be helpful. The role of public sector innovation, is the public sector just an enabler of innovation? We had to acknowledge the critique about the public sector, but also ask questions about the critical nature of innovation within the public sector. We know that even since from the Reagan era with new public management, many would say government is the problem. And what government need to do is get out of the way so that the private sector can innovate and do their work. We know now with work like Mazukatu and others that government has always been very critical to innovation. The classical example that she uses is that it would never have been possible to put someone on the moon without government's very active role. So we had to look at that before we could look at framing innovation and failure of innovation in the public sector. When we looked at the framing, we considered what the literature was talking about enablers, about barriers. But then we also realized that we're not talking enough about risk, about uncertainty, about shocks and threats to the innovators and the innovation system, as well as agency. Agency is this esoteric concept that the social scientists love and that we rather keep to the side. But we've realized that the successful innovations were able to leverage a level of agency in the system. And just a disclaimer, we focused on the intrapreneur, the entrepreneur, the civic tech innovator engaging with government, not so much the big companies with lots of leverage and lots of political powers. And lastly, what we did was to look at two cases. One was a top-down case and one was a bottom-up case in the public sector, and made some recommendations. Let me just go back. When looking at the role and just a little bit more information on the public sector of, and I must apologize, something just went wrong in the slides because everything got completely messed up with the fonts. It will allow me to, this is supposed to be a picture, not, not even fonts. I don't know what happened now with the presentation. I should have double checked as well. We know in terms of the literature what the role of the public sector in terms of the economy, in terms of de-risking innovation, in terms of providing support, and very important. And as we work in a 4IR environment, the governance of innovation as well in the public sector. We're quite comfortable with that role, but the role of the public sector as an innovator is not always that clear. And what we tried to do was to also unpack it in terms of the logic, the purpose, how we deal with copying and scaling, and the previous presentation was talking about that as well. How do we deal in terms of collaboration and our risk propensity? What's very important for us, and unfortunately, you have to read the article now, in terms of the logic where the focus of the national system of innovation is around economic growth, economic participation, market share, and so on. The focus of the public sector is about the citizen and improvement of services. And all of these raised questions in terms of how we formulate our policy. Very important in terms of, I want to focus, for example, on the copying and scaling aspect. Very important for an innovation policy is to protect intellectual property and patents and have a system in place. But in the public sector, we want to scale for as cheap as possible, as free as possible. So the free sharing and open innovation system becomes very important for us. And the question again then, in a transformative innovation policy environment, how do we then deal with issues of intellectual property in the public sector? And we know with the Please Call Me court cases and so on, it becomes more and more important that if you create an entrepreneurial space in government, that you also need to deal with issues of intellectual property and with government being able to leverage. On collaboration, always the conflict between vertical and horizontal integration, we need to look at that. And then in government, because of the need for engagement with the citizen, because for the way that we pay taxes and need to account to citizens and the electorate for taxes, we are in general risk averse. The first thing that we will hear is what is the audit outcome of a government department? How many departments, how many municipalities got clean audits and how many didn't? That creates a culture of risk aversion in the public sector that we need to deal with and create the mechanisms in a transformative innovation policy. At least this slide looks better. We moved from understanding the broad policy issues, the differences between public sector innovation and the private sector and government support for private sector innovation, towards trying to create a framework for understanding then what are the pressure points, what are the areas that we need to be cognizant of when we're talking about the life and death of innovation in the public sector. And if you have the individual, the team, or the innovator, or the SMME at the center, we identified or looked at 4 key areas. I've already mentioned them. We looked at the enablers. What are the drivers and the key success factors that supports innovation in the public sector? We looked at the barriers. What are the absence of these enablers? What are the constraints for the public sector or to work in the public sector? Noting that sometimes enablers and barriers can interchange. Funding at the wrong time can become a problem. Funding at the right time could become an enabler of the innovation. We also looked then at agency, and a very practical working definition for agency in this context would be the ability to navigate on this innovation journey. That's very important for the innovator to be able to navigate the national system of innovation to be able to identify the barriers and find ways around it, and then deal with the risks and uncertainties and shocks that are leading to failure. Because this is what is creating the failure within the public sector. And then we analyzed 2 case studies. Very important to also note is that when we analyze, we need to be clear of what lies on the individual level, what lies on the organizational level, and what then lies on the systems level, the policies and related issues. Organization, we have a myriad of organizations in the National System of Innovation. We have departments, we have NACI, we have TIA, we have all the science councils, and many provincial institutions. How does an innovator, from the perspective of the innovator, have to navigate the organizational spaces and the system spaces, whilst getting the right staff in place, getting the funding in place? And one of the things that we've seen in both case studies, for example, is that the lines between organization and innovator and system are sometimes blurred, because the personal survival of the innovator and the personal finances of the innovator cannot always be separated from the innovation and from the business model of the innovator. So we had to look at all 3 levels. The 2 case studies that we looked at was the Memeza community alarm system, which was a bottom-up solution coming from a victim of crime that accessed the National System of Innovation, the Innovation Hub, and various funding mechanisms in order to develop the solution and then test and pilot and roll out in a public service environment. We also looked at Urban to Song Service Center that was created in 2011 at the Maponya Mall in Soweto. And the executive director would recall from his PCAS days issues and debates we had around multi-purpose service centers and later to song centers. This is a product of those engagements. And so we looked at this innovation within government called an urban service center in a mall-based environment. Let me just maybe give a little bit more detail then about the life and death in both. What we saw with Memeza was an innovator that was able to leverage the National System of Innovation to develop her solution that originated from her own experiences with crime. She had full ownership of the solution, but she had to navigate a very fragmented system. A solution was functioning within the community safety policing environment. And you can imagine 9 provincial departments of community safety. You've got the Civilian Secretariat of Policing, and you've got the police force. You've got various institutions within that, community policing forums, and then had to access the National System of Innovation for funding and for further development. The kind of resilience that we found amongst the team that took this was amazing, that despite many, many pitfalls and challenges, they were able to keep going at it. But the system was not very accommodating to create a continuous development and integration into the public sector. And up to today, there's actually a death of political support. Because despite being able to demonstrate at pilot level and at a first round of implementation level that was supported by the National System of Innovation, it never fully integrated in an institutional way into the public sector. And as of today, it is functioning, but not at the level that we want to see it function because it was not fully integrated. We have seen new political calls in terms of the way that community safety is, for example, being dealt with in Gauteng, which then exclude a small player like this. And that's a very important point to recognize. The Urban to Song Center is something that, because it was top-down driven by a minister based on very good research, based on very good case studies, it found immediate footing. It was able to get ring-fenced funding from National Treasury, and it created a space for experimentation, which is something that didn't always happen in the public sector. So there was a lot of expectation for this kind of model of service delivery, where you have integrated services in a mall environment where a citizen can walk in and access government services as a single point of entry. However, because of various reasons, that initial very strong agency was lost. And it became an operational issue. So the original intent that this was a pilot project so that we can learn lessons for replication across the public sector was lost, and it became a matter of appointing a manager, appointing service providers for this, renting out the space, who's paying this and who's paying that, to the point that it actually has become a perpetual pilot project, which has never been replicated. So we saw tremendous success as a pilot, but death in scaling. And in the article, we're trying to unpack some of the reasons for this. So the case studies that we use were then to look at these various factors, how they integrate at individual, organization, and systems level, and then what can we learn in terms of innovation policy. And again, coming back to the messed up slide, in terms of recommendations, we quoted Forsman in the article, and I'll rather read it. Innovation is the product of human ingenuity or human creativity and action, not of industrial or policy processes. And I think that's for us a very important, that it's about human creativity and action, not about industrial processes. And if we are looking at the case studies from that perspective, what we are asking, going back to a transformative innovation environment, is for a human-centered ecosystem that can enable agency, that can enable demand-side mechanisms and actions. Because when we look at the national system of innovation, the bulk of the funding, the bulk of the capacity lies in supply-side activities. But the demand side from the service delivery environment, those mechanisms are not mature yet within our national system. So we can use then pathways of experimentation, things like living labs, to then strengthen our understanding of the demand side, testing and piloting at in a sandbox environment within a public sector context, which can then further inform the development of the public sector innovation space. Sadly, many innovations go to die when we bring it into the public sector. Many innovations, and there's this colloquial expression within the national system of innovation that the innovations are shelved. We have so many innovations at the CSIR, HSRC that are shelved. We hope that this article would contribute in terms of creating an ecosystem for public sector innovation that fundamentally have differences with the innovation that we find within the national system of innovation, that we are able to create those pathways for experimentation and bring much more of the national system into public sector service delivery. Once again, apologies. We'll be able to share the beautiful pictures of the slides. And thank you, Program Manager.
Thank you, Pierre, for that insight into the planes that don't return and the planes that fly in the public sector. A slight change to our program now, because as you may have noticed, we're running a little over time. We're going to go to one of our online speakers, Dr. Michael Kahn, and then we'll finish with Nobile. Dr. Michael Kahn is an independent policy advisor who served in government, NGOs, and academia, and is a former executive director of the HSRC. He holds positions at several South African universities, including honorary professor of practice at UJ, research fellow at Stellenbosch, and extraordinary professor at the University of the Western Cape. He's the author of over 100 articles, books, and chapters, and scores of consultancy reports. He holds a PhD and DIC from Imperial College London. And we're about to hear about his chapter, which explores the construct that Zama referred to earlier, namely the innovation chasm, or lack thereof. Dr. Kahn.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I can't start the video because you're in control. So I will be a talking head unless you can bring me to life. Still not. Are you able to get the video feed to work? Hello?
Hi, Dr. Kahn. We're seeing your name, but not your face as yet. We're hearing you loud and clear, though.
And what about the presentation?
No,
You're
we're not seeing
controlling
that. Okay, now we're seeing no presentation yet.
I did send it through yesterday. Yeah, there we go. I exist. Thank you. What about the PowerPoint?
Yeah, we're seeing you.
Yeah,
Well,
and
seeing
the presentation.
We're seeing you, but no presentation. And we're seeing
Well,
you
that's on-
intermittently.
That's on your side. Your people have the presentation unless you want me to mount it. Sorry about this. It's not under my control.
Yeah, if you can mount it, please.
Then you'll have to give me sharing. Just a moment.
Yeah, you do have sharing capacity now.
Can you see the screen, my screen?
No, we're seeing you, but we're seeing you. We're not seeing the
Okay,
presentation.
Share screen. Here we go. Share. Okay. How's that?
Yeah, we're seeing chasms of understanding.
Okay, you got chasms. Wonderful. Sorry about the delay. Firstly, let me just say two thanks. The first thank you is to MISTRA itself. When you approached me to write a chapter, I think you asked me to write about innovation in higher education, and I said, hang on a minute, I don't think that's the best use of my time. And so we agreed I would do this chapter, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity. The second thanks is to Joel Netshitenza, who more or less spoke to the chapter in his wonderful opening remarks, and then to my colleague, Mlungisi Pele, carried on with providing the context. So what I'm doing in this chapter is to challenge three myths, which have been propagated quite effectively over the last 30 years since what was referred to as Change Starts Now, which I think is when Roger Jardine was the first DG of DAX. The second one, so the first is the innovation chasm. The second is this feeling of we've got lost technologies. And the third is that we have all this amazing, instantly commercializable R&D, and it's not happening, and why. And in order to try and answer this address the series of myths, I basically adopt a stance on political economy. And it's against that background that I took 4 case studies, as well as looking at a few of the mega projects that have been mentioned on the way. Then I do the deconstruction and an analysis in terms of the social contract, and I offer some recommendations. It's salutary, in fact, that Joel began by talking about 2 really important things. The one is our prowess in space science, and I'll come back to that. And the second was mentioning the work that started in HIV, the etiology of HIV and TB, and then went on into our ability to do the genomics around COVID-19. The very first fits under the heading of flagship science, and the second goes under the heading of what I call the Republic of Science. Okay. For me, in the political economy terms, it's useful, if we're going to characterize South Africa, to, I think, refer to a construct I refer to as Cal-Africa, which is that we have aspects of California as well as Africa. We have rich and poor, we have extreme inequality side by side. And in trying to understand where we came from and where we're going to, around about 2006, I wrote a paper where I was looking at what I refer to as the constructed crisis of apartheid South Africa and how this shaped the present. And we moved from a state of siege to constitutional democracy, and in that process moved from a warfare state much toward a welfare state. And on the other side, on the right-hand side, we had the old constructed advantage of import substitution. Minister Patel might think about that. And then we go into the top right quadrant, where we are facing a completely different world order of globalization, working under the WTO rules and the rest of it. What I'm doing here is to position the whole discussion around innovation in a much larger context. We are currently a low-growth environment with extreme inequality, low fixed capital investment, high burden of disease. We have the social safety net in place, however inadequate people may think it is. And there in the middle, a bullet point, a high average wage, which is something that people find very difficult to get their heads around. If you ask in any room like this, what is the total cost of employment of a head teacher, the bidding usually begins at around 300,000. The truth of the matter is a head teacher, for which you may read a senior university professor, earns in the order of 1.2 million. And that's why the recent report of the CHE into the remuneration of vice chancellors comes as no surprise. We are a high wage environment. Now, to the substance of the chapter. It starts with the very famous best-selling book of Geoffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm. And it's important to understand where this started. Moore started with work on agricultural innovation undertaken by Rogers in 1962. And he then applied his mind through the lens of the sociology of organizations to what it was that led some good ideas to flourish and others not. And he concentrated on the market, how customer needs change, how to generate interest in new products, how to identify a market, indeed, how to innovate. This would be the language that an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs would understand. So there's the crossing the chasm, and look at the bell curve at the bottom. And now you get an active technology transfer where Gideon de Wet, working in the CSIR, applies his mind to the problem of where we are going as a country. And he gives us this concept known as the technology colony, where basically we rely entirely on overseas technology sources, and we do a bit of local research. And then there's a hole at the bottom there, the design and development hole, and then something happens in local industry and industrial products. And this diagram was taken up, if you look on the right, you can see it reproduced very nicely. It was taken up and presented to us in the policy process around the R&D strategy of 2002 and the 10-year innovation plan. And there you have this thing called the innovation chasm. And the innovation chasm grew its own legs and turned out to be a very useful device to have a conversation. I'm arguing that the innovation chasm idea as articulated then was inappropriate, but I have to acknowledge how successful it was in selling an idea. And the idea that was basically being sold is that it's actually a funding problem. The messaging was, we have all this excellent R&D just waiting to become products on the shelf. If only you would give us more money, we could do it. And again, this plays in perfectly into what's referred to as the linear model of innovation. A number of people have used the word linear in this meeting so far. And so you've got this wonderful combination of an idea, the innovation chasm, and linear model thinking. And linear model thinking really serves the science community very, very well. That's been the story since the 1940s, when poor Vannevar Bush was accused of having given us the linear model of innovation. Give us the money, say the scientists, and we will give you the goodies. Give us the money, we'll give you Meerkat. Give us the money, we'll give you the square kilometer array, and all else will follow, and we'll be happy into the sunset, except it's mainly done at night. So innovation chasm, one can appreciate the success of an idea, but one also has to ask whether the idea actually had feet earthed in reality. Fund us and we shall deliver. When you look at the policy mix over the next 3 decades, Mlungisi has spoken eloquently to many of these things. You can hear it. The S&T white paper, the R&D strategy going up the curve, the strategic management model, the 10-year innovation plan, and then we get to the present with the new white paper and the decadal plan. And running through in the background, within the department, within all of its organizations, its subsidiaries, is this narrative of the innovation chasm. Okay, I have a problem seeing my own slide. So issues that came up along the way, it's a problem of coordination. We heard it earlier on, we have to fix the IPR regime. We've got to think seriously about equity and a very strong flavor, and I'll come back to it later, of what we call techno-nationalism. Why am I stuck? Right. So the 4 case studies. The first one is around the personality of Thackeray. Thackeray was a scientist working at the CSIR. The CSIR had been involved in electric vehicle technology and battery technology, the famous sodium batteries of the Zebra project. And here we have Thackeray, who does his PhD at UCT, and he then does a postdoc at the University of Oxford on lithium crystals, and his supervisor for the postdoc is somebody called Goodenough. And Thackeray, much to everyone's surprise, is able to modify his lithium crystals by inserting manganese, and this opens the path toward a low-cost lithium battery. He comes back home, and the CSR basically loses its interest. They say, we don't think you can show future outcomes. And so he says to himself, what now? And a job opportunity comes up, and he moves to North America, to the Argonne National Laboratory, which is where he settled down. And he produced wonderful work, developed a large research team. He has more than 200 papers to his name and 55 patent applications. And there, around about the year 2015, in the Congress of Lithium Thinkers, he was saying, why is it that my supervisor, Goodenough, isn't good enough to get a Nobel Prize? And finally, in 2019, Goodenough, Whittington, and Yoshino shared the Nobel Prize for lithium battery technology. Now, there's a big lesson in all of this. The lesson is, firstly, this is not a technology that was lost to South Africa. We didn't lose anything. An individual moved with thoughts between his ears. There was no working technology. There was no set of patents that could be turned into lithium battery technology. His move across to Oregon meant that he was now working in a very large group. Size matters. Yoshino was working in Asahi in Japan in a huge research group. CSIR, tiny. Size matters. Secondly, it takes a long time. 7 decades of use-oriented basic research was behind this. So, message here, this is not a case of a lost technology. Please can we rethink. Size matters. Research groups matter. Mobility can help you. The internet can help you, but ultimately you need to rub shoulders in large research groups. Okay, next one. The next one I've titled Oil's Well. And if you start at the very beginning on the top bullet point, ammonium nitrate mixed in with diesel is an explosive substance. When we speak about mining and you ask most people, how do you make holes in walls and in shafts, they think of dynamite. Wrong. Most mining today is done with liquid explosives, hence the tanker there. That tanker has got two compartments. One is with fuel oil and the other is the ammonium nitrate mix. These are pumped into the well and a detonator is inserted and the thing is all electronically controlled. There's huge path dependence at work here. South African explosive expertise goes back into the late 1880s. And at one point, AECI was running the largest dynamite factory in the world. And in the First World War, South Africa was supplying explosives to the imperial war effort. So also go back to the beginning, NH4NO3, ammonium nitrate. Where do you get ammonia from? You get it from the air. Who gave it to us from the air? That was Fischer, back in Germany in 1907, got a Nobel Prize for it too. Okay, on with the story here. Why is this one relevant? I'm talking to you here about three companies, AECI as the parent, and African Explosives Limited, and DetNet, its 2 subsidiaries. Of course, on the way, every process will turn up problems. In the case of the fuel oil mix, incomplete combustion, and through the network of collaborating universities, AECI, AEL collaborate with 6 or 7, you can see it in the chapter, universities. Interestingly enough, the breakthrough to fixing this problem of incomplete combustion came from a University of Technology, from CPUT, funded a doctoral project, brought in the doctoral graduate onto the staff, signed a non-disclosure agreement, maintained company secrets, avoided the restrictions of the Intellectual Property from R&D Act, and went on to be happy users of this product. AEL DetNet, after Sasol, have the largest United States patent portfolio of any industrial concern in the country. But when you look at their international patent portfolio, you're looking at hundreds of patents registered in patent offices all over the world. One of the things we fail to do when we speak about South African company patenting is we only look at the European Patent Office and the United States Patent and Trademark Office. There's so much more going on that is hidden below the radar. X-rays are a girl's best friend. So the first one is talking about lost technologies. The second one is talking about successful innovation inside in a firm. The third one, X-rays are a girl's best friend. This is about Lodox, and everybody's heard of Lodox. Lodox begins with De Beers' constant problem of theft in the mines, in the diamond mines, and the fact that there's a limit to how many times you can X-ray a miner before you kill them. And this became an even bigger problem in the early 1990s when international health regulations reduced the amount of ionizing radiation you'd expose a human being to. De Beers itself had enormous capabilities in the use of X-rays to cause diamonds to fluoresce. So you've got a conveyor belt with ground up material, which includes diamonds. You bathe it in X-rays, the diamonds fluoresce, and a jet of air is directed at the fluorescing diamond and poof, knocks it off the conveyor belt into a hopper so that you do the prior sorting electrically and the sorting by hand will be done later. So you see, De Beers has considerable X-ray technology understanding, and now you've got this problem of wanting to somehow deal with X-raying human beings, and you have to reduce the intensity, and you need to therefore intensify the image. They approach UCT, and who's UCT? UCT from the 1930s has experience in X-ray crystallography. 2 Nobel laureates did their master's degrees at UCT, Aaron Klug and Alan Cormack. And who in the room has not had a CAT scan and should be saying thank you to Alan Cormack and Housefield for the technology that came out of it? Technologies emerge from South African universities, but they may not necessarily emerge on South African soil. So De Beers solved its immediate problem with the image intensifier. They developed a technology called Scanx, and then somebody said, maybe we can use it in the medical field in general usage, and that's the big scanner on the top right, and hence you get Lodox. Now again, size matters. Scanx generated 3 patents. Scanx was competing against Hitachi, Siemens, General Electric. Siemens produces 30 patents a day. It's no competition. The problem here is, as Moore would understand it, that there was a difficulty in finding the market. And it was made worse by the fact that at that time, we did not have a medical device regulator in place. The health products environment was defective at that score, and it meant that it actually incentivized South African surgeons to import products from abroad, even where local products were available, because the local products could not get the kind of certification you wanted. So the difficulties you see coming through here are to do with framework conditions and understanding markets. Is this a lost technology? The actual moment came where an episode of Grey's Anatomy used one of these scanners to look at a trauma victim. And today, the main market for these scanners, Lodox, is actually in forensic medicine, and the biggest market is in South Africa to study the victims of trauma. And boy, do we do trauma on scale. Next and last one. From the finite to the infinite. And this was where today's meeting began, with Joel talking about the Meerkat and the SARAO, the Radio Astronomy Organization. And the beginnings of the Meerkat story, in fact, before that, Cat 7, is in the Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering at Stellenbosch, which was deeply embedded in what I've elsewhere described as the telemetry sectoral system of innovation. They had expertise in electromagnetism, modeling, detecting, and assisting companies like Roynot Radar to develop radars for military applications. 2 of their students had PhD bursaries from the SA Navy, and when they graduated in 1998, they were told, "Jammer, maar jy het nie 'n job nie. Sorry, you've got no job because of the cuts, and be happy. We're not going to ask you to repay your bursary, but there's the door. Goodbye." And these 2 fellows went out without a job, sorry, no job, and they had to reinvent themselves. And this is where, I put it in green, nature rewards the prepared mind. They recall, one of them recalled having read an article by a German author, got in touch with the fellow, realized that together with their expertise in microwave radiation and finite modeling, finite applications, differential equations, and all the rest, they could probably develop some apparatus that they could sell into the South African market, which was hungry for radiation detectors because this was the advent of mobile. And that gave rise to the first company called EMSS, Electromagnetics Software Systems. Today it's known as AlphaWave. The article, the paper, the chapter when I wrote it is now, of course, out of date. AlphaWave has 250 employees. It's a medium-sized company. So you start from 2 and you become a medium-sized company. This is what we want to see more of. This is what we want more case studies of. Now you can ask the question, what about patenting? Do they have patents? The answer is no. The one US patent that AlphaWave has got is actually for a golf ball tracking system. It's not for the radars. It's not for the square kilometer array. That is protected by company secrets and constant product innovation. The story here is also the story that Matsukuto would understand of the entrepreneurial state, because in going to the meerkat, a contract was entered into with the NRF, which had the responsibility for the telescope utilities, and staff was seconded on the agreement that the IP would actually belong to the NRF. When you look at the project as a whole, when you've got time to read it, I would argue it's a perfect example of how things should work. The 2 drivers understood what they were doing. They were prepared to take risks. Not everything worked. They were constantly inventing, and they were making use of all of the incentives that were available. The SPY incentive, the R&D tax incentive in its first iteration. And what's particularly gratifying about their work is that they now support students at Stellenbosch University. It also poses questions around geographic location, because as it happens, our EMSS is situated in the Technopark outside, on the edge, on the eastern edge of Stellenbosch. This is an entity owned by the municipality. What's the connection, the geographic connection between the Technopark and the university? And the answer, regrettably, is nil, minor. It's a nice place to work, beautiful views, right next to the winelands all. So more questions to be probed, but ultimately a beautiful example of how to go about innovating. Which brings me toward closure, and I have to say something about Kusile and Medupi, the PBMR and the Joule. Kusile and Medupi, well, maybe I should leave it to Stephen Curtis to write more about, or Yelland. But essentially there, these projects were pushing the technological frontier. We had before that Matimba, very high temperature and pressure. Kusile and Medupi simply moved up another 100 degrees, simply moved up another 100 degrees. They were dry cooled, exactly as the dry cooling at Matimba. So this was not radical technology. What was radical was the political environment in which this thing was embedded, and I'm not going to say more about that. Now you go to the helium-cooled pebble bed modular reactor, which was bringing in the established technology from Germany at Jülich, which again sold itself very successfully into our environment. And when you read the chapter, you'll see reference there to the incredible radiation contamination of the entire Jülich plant, and the extent to which this rests at the door of their pebble bed, I can't answer. But this thing was far from a perfect technology when it was brought in. One of the questions to be applied to any new apparent innovation is, well, show us the patent suite. Show us the patent suite, S-U-I-T-E, not S-W-E-E-T. Show us the patent suite. What does the patent suite of the PBMR look like? The answer is pretty thin. One patent to do with the pebbles themselves. Is it still in force? Has it been licensed to anyone? These are tough questions to be asked by the political decision makers, by Treasury, by the IDC. Show us the patent suite. Don't tell us stories. Anybody can tell a good story. China was mentioned earlier. China went the water-cooled route. not the helium route. The Chinese PBMR is happening. Over in the US, the South African engineers who immigrated across there from the PBMR joined this new company. That thing has stalled, which brings me to the dual electric vehicle. Ask the same question. How many patents were awarded to Optimal Energy, the owners of the Joule? Answer, 1. What kind of patent was it? It was a patent for the body, a design patent. Who owns that patent? The designer. Was the dual electric vehicle an example of radical technology? I have to say it was not. The market may have understood it better than the promoters themselves, which brings me across to Pierre Skroenraad. Nice presentation, Pierre, thank you. These, I refer here with the green arrows to 2 public sector innovations that have worked incredibly well. SARS e-filing and the COVID vaccination registration. Both of these are ICT driven. Both would have used skills from the private sector. In the case of SARS e-filing, from abroad, bring in, customize, adapt, roll out. Yours truly uses SARS e-filing. I'm waiting to pay in. This year, I pay in. COVID vaccination, you know everything about that. So in the public sector, a lot happens, and I thought, Pierre, it was great that you did the chapter with Geshe. Have I got another few minutes, or am I out of time?
You are out of time. We're very tight for time. Apologies.
In that case, I want to just close out with the last one. If you read the chapter, you'll see there's some bibliometric analysis of where we have high activity and where we have high citation. And it's very difficult to draw conclusions from your publication outputs. You may be brilliant on paleontology, or you may be brilliant at looking at distant stars. If your goal is socioeconomic impact, it's a little bit of wishful thinking to imagine that either of those 2 fields will translate into relatively short-term socioeconomic impact. Things do happen unsurprisingly, but in general, it doesn't work like that. So you have to think critically about what to fund. Secondly, you have to think critically about who's going to do the work. And although we've seen the transfer of funds from the state to the universities and the science councils, this has been mainly for salaries. Our researchers are amongst the highest paid in the world, and the number of researchers is inadequate to the job that we expect on them. The third point, which I haven't had a chance to speak about, is the social contract. I've characterized this previously as South Africa's social contract for science walking on 2 legs. On the one side, the state, on the other side, Polanyi's Republic of Science. And I would contend it still continues like that, where on the state side, we have welfare science coupled with flagship science. A very important indicator is how much we're spending as a percentage of gross expenditure on basic research. Basic research by its very nature is very, 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 very far forward looking. You want to be spending more on applied research. That's what Korea was doing in the 1970s. It's what China was doing in the 1980s. Can we afford to spend what we do on basic research? Because what happens then in the right-hand picture is you get a disarticulation between the higher education sector, post-secondary education sector in blue, and the enterprise sector in orange. What's the link with the industrial policy? That is a topic for another day. So I think I'll have to stop there, and I thank you for your indulgence and for the honor of being able to address you. And great meeting.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. We hear next from Dr. Nobile Zaba, who's also a researcher in MISTRA Science Faculty, and her work focuses on a just transition to a low-carbon future in South Africa, and she's the co-editor of MISTRA's book on that subject. Nobile also focuses on broader climate change and environmental issues, and on possibilities for beneficiation of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. She obtained a PhD in chemistry at Wits, I'm going to cut all her other, because we're running so short of time, I'm going to cut all your other academic achievements, and is the joint author of a book on governmental-led technological missions, including some famous ones. Ombile, over to you. She's also kindly agreed to slash her presentation as far as possible.
Thank you, Terry, for that. My PhD is from the University of Western Cape. Greetings to everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today in launching this publication. So I am going to be talking to you today on my chapter that is titled Government-Led Technological Missions, where we assess the PPMR, the SK, as well as the HISA project. The good news is this project has been talked to quite a bit today, so you have a bit of an idea. So I'll just be taking through a little bit of context and then delving into the case studies, the lessons, as well as the conclusion and recommendation. Okay, that is not working well for me. Is there somewhere I should be pointing? Oh, okay, there. Sorry about that. So just a little bit of context. The chapter aims to investigate the successes and failures of 3 high technology projects that represent government-led technological missions, namely the pepper bed modular reactor, which I'll be referring to as the PPMR, the square kilometer array, which is SK, as well as Hydrogen South Africa, also known as HISA. South African government embarks on this huge technological project as part of its science, innovation, and strategy, as well as to contribute to economic development in the country. I think Dr. Cele earlier alluded to that. So the title speaks to missions because these projects do not themselves constitute to innovations. However, they do seek to promote technological advancements within their respective value chains and fields, which sometimes ultimately results in innovations spinning out of these projects. Let's have a look at the first case study, which is the pebble bed modular reactor project. And this was designed to address South Africa's energy, to expand South Africa's capacity in the energy sector. And the PPMR is a small high temperature reactor that uses helium gas as a coolant medium to remove heat and enrich uranium that is kept in a ceramic ball-sized pebbles using graphite as a moderator. And these pebbles are cooled by a gas rather than water. And then it was intended to have capacity to be built relatively quickly as it is small. The other advantages of using small modular reactors is that they can be deployed and built quickly and relatively inexpensive. So the project is assessed in 3 factors, namely its technological viability, economic viability, as well as its market viability. So in terms of the technology side, my previous speaker, Michael, has also spoke about this technology And then, so there was a problem with the reliability and the viability of the PPMR technology at a time, as this technology had been acquired from Germany, where it had failed, and South Africa used the same patent to build its own small modular reactor. The design of the technology was overlooked and underestimated, as the PPMR used a helium gas-driven turbine, which was unproven technology at the time. And this design was later changed when the team realized that it wasn't working out too well. But at the time, it was years down the line, and the government had decided to then cut the funding to this project. There were also problems with the size of the plant, which was originally scaled to 267 megawatts, and when the design changed, it was later then scaled to 400 megawatts, and then so there was also challenges with the power output. Was scaled up without the increase of the physical size of the plant. So the technological viability and this technology was not sound at the time, and it seems that the South African team decided on a wrong path. The economic viability for this project, the project was expected to be less expensive to build than the existing water pressure reactors that we currently have at Quebec, but obviously over time the cost escalated, and therefore it became very unsustainable to keep the project going. And then in terms of market viability, the PPMR basically had one customer in the country, and that was Eskom. And at a later stage, Eskom decided to pull out of the project due to them saying that they are changing direction. And therefore, the project, it resulted in the project having no viable customer at a time. And therefore, without a proper marketing strategy and a customer, the project became not very much viable. So this poor marketing strategy by the South African government ultimately also led to the downfall and the demise of this project. So let's have a look at the second case study, which is the square kilometer array. The square kilometer array is intends to build the world's largest telescope, the world's most sensitive telescope between South Africa and Australia. And this is an intergovernmental project and it has 10 full members, including Australia, China, Germany, Sweden, and other countries also mentioned there. The SKA will be constructed in the Southern Hemisphere. Phase 1, SKA 1 has begun in South Africa and Australia and should be finished. And then there are plans for Phase 2 to be built in SKA partner countries. So in terms of assessing this project, it's basically assessed based on sustainability, governance, as well as socio-economic benefits. So in terms of sustainability, the SKA is very sustainable project because there are policies that guarantees that the SKA is positioned sustainable in the host nations, and it provides a compelling case for socio-economic benefits of the membership of the project. And also to prove its readiness, South Africa had to build CAT-7 telescope, the precursor for the Meerkat telescope, which has been successfully built. And also South African government had to enact legislation to protect areas to guarantee the security of the SKA project, as well as the citizens around the areas that live in where the project is being constructed. And in terms of governance, the SKA is very well governed because it's an intergovernmental, because it's also led by an intergovernmental organization. Also, the operation of the SKA project is promoted in accordance with the principles stated in the convention and is governed by a committee that is elected by the members. And therefore, there is a lot of accountability and transparency with the governance of the SKA. And in terms of socio-economic benefits, the SKA obviously contributes towards the global-based knowledge economy around astronomy, and South Africa has now more astronomy aspects than it did before we had the SKA project. It also creates jobs and opportunities in areas where the project is located, such as the Science Museum, the visiting centers, and so on and so forth. And then the last case study, which is Hydrogen South Africa, is aiming to beneficiate the extensive platinum group metal reserves that the country contains, as well as building a thriving hydrogen economy. Basically, HISA South Africa is divided into 3 competency areas distributed across the country, which is HISA infrastructure, HISA systems at UWC, HISA infrastructure at Northwest, as well as HISA catalysis based in Mintech, as well as UCT. And these different competency centers have different objectives that contribute towards the goals of the HISA program. As elaborated there, you will have to read the chapter to find out. The HISA project is then assessed based on technological viability, economic viability, as well as market viability. In terms of technological viability, the HISA program and the technology is very sound, as we are very much aware that hydrogen is a vital component of decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors, as well as contributing towards the decarbonization, the overall decarbonization to reach net zero. And then in terms of economic viability, we all know that the decarbonization of other sectors in the country will ultimately contribute to increased economic growth. And in terms of market, because of this increased interest in hydrogen-related technologies for the low carbon economy, the HISA program is very well positioned within the markets. The markets already exist. And then let's have a look at some okay. So in terms of the lessons learned that the chapter summarizes, you'll have to find out from the chapter. But I would just like to conclude shortly with reflecting on some of Dr. Tele's question regarding whether these technologies are bad or good. In this case, I think these were good technologies because because they were addressing important country challenges that we were facing at the time. What did not go well with them, especially with the PBMR, is the path with which the South African team probably decided to take, as well as also the technology needed time to mature. As we can see that other countries like China are now making headway with this technology. Probably the South African team as well needed time and more investment into this technology. The SKA is currently doing very well, as alluded by our ED in his address earlier. And then the HISA project is characterized in this chapter as a continuous or as an evolving project. Its outcome is yet to be seen, but it's quite promising. Thank you.
Many thanks, Nobile, and I'm sorry that we had to ask you to cut that presentation short, but a reminder that you can read more about what Nobile has to say in the book. I have good news and bad news regarding refreshments. The good news is that you are all very warmly invited to a delicious lunch at 1 o'clock. The bad news is that I ask your indulgence, please. We're going to skip the tea break in order to make that lunch. We're very aware that people are hungry and getting tired, but we think it's better just to proceed to lunch and wrap as close to one as wrap at 1, I promise. Okay. We have now Dr. Babungile Mkhize, who's Director of Innovation Priorities and Instruments at the DSI. Dr. Mkhize, we'd be grateful to hear you respond to some of the issues raised by the authors.
Thank you. Is this working? Good afternoon. I think it's an afternoon already. Good afternoon, everyone. And to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Kele, good afternoon as well. I don't think I don't have much to say because Dr. Kele has already shared the DSI sentiments and reflections on the book itself and how it aligns with our priorities and agenda. But maybe I can just brag a little bit that I am delighted and proud to say the DSI has supported this work with about 2,005,207 rands, I think. So I look at this book and I'm like, there is our 2 million. And particularly that was my directorate, Innovation Priorities and Instrument, that actually contributed and kind of walked the path with MISTRA up to this point. Having said that, and having said that, I think to derive more value out of this book from our side as the department, it will be more prudent to, at least at a later stage, I don't know after how many years, we're just starting to roll out the decadal plan, maybe to have a second or even a third edition of the same book as a follow-up to the themes highlighted in the book, which Dr. Kele also dwelled a bit on them as they are outlined in the book. For example, the commercialization pitfalls. That will help us actually to kind of see if we have managed to improve from the issues that the book and the experts have actually, which we appreciate a lot, the experts that contributed in putting these together. So we would love to see in future, how have we progressed? Because the problem in South Africa, which was also at some point, I saw Prof. Khan was talking here. I've read a lot of some of his articles. I've traveled with him, even though maybe he doesn't remember me anymore, in some international DSI travels. I think we tend to produce very good things, very good strategies. The OECD also commended us on that, oh guys, you're good with strategy development, but comes the implementation part, we fall short. So I would say let's rather make it a point that this book will not just go into the shelf in the library or somewhere, but we keep an eye and track what the things that the issues that came out of it. So I will propose that at some point, give us some time. I don't know, Dr. Kele, how much time should they give us in implementing the decadal plan, and then assess if we have done well, the problems or the issues raised in the book, have they been addressed? That's one, and also the recommendations also are made in this book. So the second edition should be able to look into those recommendations. Have we tried? But we cannot be able to do that if MISTRA says, no, we have done the book, so it's fine. We're looking forward to ask for funding to do another one. Can I propose that maybe a seminar or seminars with the DSI, that you consider that as MISTRA, to kind of workshop the issues that are outlined in the book? In that way, we can then be able to derive value out of this book, the value that MISTRA also can be proud of. And then the next point, I think, in agreement with what Dr. Zamanzima is a very heavy word, Zamanzima and Prof. Khan alluded to in terms of innovation chasm. And the linear model approach to innovation, which you have seen, or they have actually attested to its failure and how it is now ineffective. But I like the point that Prof. Khan made to say, over the years, the linear model approach has benefited the scientific community so well. But the truth is, things are changing. And with that, I'm of the view that even the innovation chasm itself has changed over the years in the South African STI evolution as we move along in addressing certain challenges, but also the innovation chasm has changed its form and its physiology. And I want to put a challenge to the team that has worked on this book. Can you maybe find out for us what is the form now of the innovation chasm that we have currently, as opposed to the time when we first said or identified that we have the innovation chasm, which was based on that linear approach to innovation. So, and I think the reason the innovation chasm has changed its form, you can say it's morphology or physiology. Those who did those ology studies, they will know. I think it's owing to the fact that the problems that we are facing as the country, which is common in developing countries, they are wicked. While you try to resolve one problem, then down the line in the system, you create a new problem. It's the nature of the problems that we are facing. So with that, I will leave that challenging kind of a question of, can we find out what is the current form of the innovation chasm that we are facing now over the years? What is its physiology? What is its morphology and all that? So with that, thank you very much, team that has worked on this book. We really appreciate and looking forward to engage with you, Ways Lorraine, to kind of explore the possibility of a seminar with the DSI in particular, just to workshop those specific themes that are talking to our priorities and the STI agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mkhize, and thank you. We are very grateful for the 2,005,007 rand. And want to say that we are grateful too for the DSI's willingness to support and collaborate with MISTRA. And it's a privilege to be able to produce scholarly insights that can be used by policymakers like yourself. So thank you for that. I'm going to try and stick to my promise to finish at 1 promptly, which means we have time only for 2 questions. So you're going to have to be short. I know we have questions online, but I'll start with questions in the room. Prof, I'm going to take the mic to you, and then authors will have to come up to the podium to answer. So we have 1 question there, and I'm afraid that's all we have time for.
Mine is not a question. It's a plea to help MISTRA. from the representatives of the department. I would like to challenge Ms. Mkiza to say, when you have that workshop, can you please invite the Department of Higher Education, the Department of, what's the lower level? Basic Education, to be part of this conversation, because we want these books to be in the classrooms. We want them to be in the classrooms. So it's a plea. I come from MISTRA, so I really want to plea that let it happen.
Thank you very much for that. We endorse that plea.
Good day. My name is Tebogo Makube. Yeah, I'm a student. Okay. Well, I have a comment as well as questions. My understanding of innovation and the framework around it is that there can be innovative ways to deliver services, but also there can be innovative products. All right. And South Africa is doing or implementing innovative ways in the energy space. You know, new energy sources are being implemented, but that is haphazard. You know, there is no roadmap. So that's one area that I think you should allude to as to how must government use innovation to deliver a myriad of products, including housing, instead of us funding the delivery of houses, because the fiscus is limited. But also then the question I'm raising on two aspects. It's innovation is risky, you know. You don't specifically cover the role of public procurement in procuring innovative products. How must we do that as a country? Because innovation is unknown, it needs to be developed. Can we confine it to competitive bidding? All right, so that's one question. Lastly, it's on the role of productive incentives or any incentives to encourage investments in innovation. So if the fiscus is limited, what other tax incentives must be considered by the government to incentivize the private sector to invest in innovation, including the triple Ps, public-private partnerships as a form of delivering innovation in South Africa? Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Kira, would you like to
Thanks. My co-author just left the room, so she left me. No, she had an urgent thing to deal with. Part of the question should actually be answered by DSI in the sense of they've recently created a technology acquisition fund that would allow for first procurement of innovation. I think that is something that need to be explored more and starts dealing with this issue, because these issues are critical for innovation in the public sector and has been highlighted extensively. So both in terms of the funding of pre-commercial solutions and bring that within that living lab environment that we were talking about, as well as then the procurement. There are procurement mechanisms, but they are difficult, and it's more the culture that prevents us from using it, because you can deal with a single source procurement, and in the requirements by National Treasury, you need to indicate the innovativeness of the solution. But you also need to indicate, and that's the difficulty, the potential cost benefit, which may not be known at that stage. And then, therefore, people are not are a bit risk averse to make use of that. You also need to report on all deviations, and this become a deviation. So a CFO will be very reluctant to. So the mechanisms are there. the culture is not supportive of the mechanisms. So we need simpler mechanisms. We may need a clearinghouse through some of our institutions in the national system of innovation to say, yes, you can go ahead. This is a local developed solution. You can procure it without having to go on tender or through quotations. I hope that answers part of the question. Thanks.
Yes, very much so. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to stop the discussion there because we have very much run out of time. But we support Dr. Mkhize's call for the conversation to be continued, both in webinars and forums and in ongoing scholarship and books. There is no time for extensive closing remarks, so I'll limit myself to say simply that I think we've heard what the book does so well, and the conversation and the speakers today is to highlight the limitations and the poverty of asking simply what is agreed a very important question, which is how do we commercialize technologies? But now in South Africa, in our young democracy, to place those questions in the context of the challenges that we face. Thank you all very much for coming today, online and in present, and please join us for lunch. If you're online, I'm afraid you're thrown back on your own resources.